Hi, I'm Tony Bowen, and welcome to my Corn Country Rails. Well, I thought it was about time to do a signal update. I have not done a formal signal update since October of 2020, and I thought now would be a great time to kind of show you where I'm at. I did do a signal kind of run-by session in January of 2021, but I didn't talk a lot about the signals. I was looking at more the interaction when I had multiple trains running and had a couple operators here. But today, you're going to kind of see where I've gone from October to now with my signaling project. So I hope you will stick around and see my progress I'm making. So when I did my last full update in October, this was the set of signals that I did a very comprehensive overview on how to install them. The video was about 45 minutes long, but it showed everything from the TS2 of how to install it to running all the wires from underneath the layout, to syncing in the infrared sensors, to installing the signals themselves. And this set of signals was very important because it was the first set of signals from the lower deck coming to the upper deck, tying the two together. And obviously the big thing that ties my two decks together is the Helix. And so eastbound trains, obviously when the signal goes red, it shows something is, from the lower deck to the Helix to here, that it occupies a very large block. And so I have been kind of kicking around the idea of how I want to maybe make some intermediate signals along the way for a staging area I have. And so I'll show you what that's going to look like, or some things that I have in mind. But essentially, once I had these upper signals in, then I could essentially continue to move west from here with my signaling project. And this just happens to be vital ones because I want to make sure anything that is going east beyond this signal, it's unseen. There's hidden track here, it goes into the Helix, and I don't see it again. So it's a pretty large block. The second set of signals that I installed on the upper deck is up here at milepost 292. And essentially it's taking signals of coming out of the town of Brooklyn and essentially continuing on west. And so obviously we see a green signal on the west facing and definitely a green on the other side because nothing's operating the layout right now. This one was a little trickier because I was running out of room of where to put the sensors because I didn't want to run into the bridge abutment or, heaven forbid, drill a hole out the other side of the bridge abutment and that. So this one got a little tight to the signal, but I really didn't want to mount the signals too much on this curve. And so there's a set of sensors here, then the signals, and then another set of sensors right there. And because the ground sloped away, I used some of the Woodland Scenics plastered timber abutments, cut off the tops, kind of glued them in place, backfilled them then with a little extra reinforcement of some hot glue, and then just basically built it up with ballast, put some weeds along there, the signal box, some ties and that, just to add some other little detail to it. The third set of signals that I've installed on the upper deck is at milepost 295.5. And essentially, if we go east of the signals this way, it is essentially protecting the town of Malcolm. From the last set of signals I showed to this one protects the town of Malcolm. As we go west, going in this direction and on up the hill, and then on into the layout, it takes us to the next set of signals, which is at milepost 300. And it's a pretty long stretch of railroad at this point where there's not, on the upper deck, just not a lot of towns, but just farmland. I have a cornfield over there that I'm currently working on, and it will run into the town of Ascalon. But Ascalon, unfortunately, is going to be a town that is pretty deserted. I already have a depot over there that is pretty boarded up, and the roof has some real damage to it. There's one main stretch of track that goes through there where I have like the Jordan spreader and a Russell snowplow, and I've got a stack of switches there where I'm going to put in some buildings. I'm thinking a few of the buildings are going to be already abandoned and closed down. Like, I'd really like to do a grain elevator that is basically just really beaten and not used at all, and maybe even have a piece of track there where the switch has already been pulled, but there's still some rails that are slowly being reclaimed by the earth. And then maybe do 1 or 2 buildings that are there that might only take like a carload or 2. So not a lot of action there, but something that would add some interest. And so this signal here would protect that block of track, but anything that would essentially be there is going to be pretty much a local job and something that could just, you know, run through the town of Ascalon and not have a lot of switching being done. Now over here, I have basically west of Ascalon at milepost 300. And to me, this is an important set of signals because I really feel this is where you truly are now out on the main line. As you go west of it, you're going to go down the hill, and essentially the next set of signals is yard limits. As you come east of there and hit these signals, you're pretty much out of the yard limits, you're on the high iron of the main line, and that's where trains will kind of pick up speed. This is a very short block between milepost 300 and milepost 302. It's long enough to hold about a 24-car train in there, but I wanted to make it kind of a really short block so that if people were heading west, might be held up here at this set of signals because something might still be within the yard limits in that, and just kind of add some operating interest. Oh, and now we have a train going by now, so we'll just kind of wait, watch the signal drop from yellow to red, and then have it move on its way. As soon as the caboose clears that block, we're going to see that west signal go to green. And there it is. And I've been told that TS2, now coming out from Aztrax, has a little bit of delay now, that they're not going to be as immediate, that caboose or your last car rolls by and boom, they go right to green. And so that's a really nice feature, and I wish that would have been something that was there when I was starting to put in my TS2s, but you know, after having already now 20 signals set up and 10 TS2s, I don't think it's worth the time to take them down just to get that maybe extra minute, or excuse me, extra second or 2 in delay. The fourth set of signals that I have installed is basically at milepost 302. And as we approach the westbound signal, it is essentially yard limits. The eastbound signal is, as soon as the caboose rolls by, the end of yard limits for the train, and it can hit the next mile, or the next set of signals in milepost at 300, where then it's really given permission to head out on the open main line and can go. So essentially there could be trains held just short of this crossing and then on up the hill if there would be something kind of holding up the yard. And so if you come to this signal and the west facing one is red, it could be anything from something on the main line to something that might be occupying the yard. Because as we go on into the town of Grinnell, we've got a crossover, we've got the M and St. L tracks, and then it loops around the end of the peninsula into what is the Grinnell yard. And the signal already is red because we have an eastbound train coming at us right now. There's a set of sensors right about there where that train went over, going through the signals. And right about the end of that building is where the next set of sensors are, right in this area here. So the train makes its way on up the hill. Goes across the bridge there, over the road. And right about where that lead engine is a set of signals. And there's where the signals are for milepost 300. And now that the train is out of the block it was just occupying, the signal right here in front of us to the west on this side is now displaying yellow. This side it's displaying green. And not until it hits the second signal beyond this one will this one be restored to green. So if anything would come up to the signal now and see that yellow, the normal reduced speed, and be prepared to stop at the next signal should it be red. One thing that I've been working on this fall and this past winter is these little track diagrams, which have hopefully will be helpful once I get back into operating session. So the dark bold line is obviously the main line. The yellow is where the signals, so the last set of signals were at that milepost 302.7, but also I have the M and St. L that crosses over, and so I hope to put a couple signals. This one obviously will be lit since it faces the layout aisleway, and it'll probably be always red. This one will probably just be a dummy signal, and the fact that we'll never see the actual indication of the signal, and we're going to only see the back. The depot will go right in here. I always use, basically when I'm listing the industries, I always put the depot as number one, and then would just branch out as to, okay, the second one is the freight house, third is Hildebrandt Shoes, number 4 was York Lumber, and then number 5 I have just kind of the mock-up Kalmbach Publishing resin kit they did a few years ago that I thought would just be fun to put in there. So that name might change, but it might also stay as Kalmbach for right now too. And so these will, the nice thing about these, I did these on Google Slide, and so if I ever change a track around or omit a track, or if my signals are going to be something different here, it's really easy to go in, make that change, and then just print out that new sheet. I just did these on cardstock when I printed them, and then essentially made a tin plate. My tin plate would have the emblem, kind of the information that I could always plug in for the town. I left the main line kind of always at the same place, and then could build off that. Always had kind of the indication here to the east and to the west side, so that I could just kind of change that depending on what town location, and so they're kind of nice in the fact that sometimes we design stuff like that and might say, oh, if I make any kind of change, I'm gonna have to change all of them. And instead I made each one of them as individual slides, so if anything ever changes, I can pull that off, put the new one up there. And so right now they're just kind of with blue painter's tape taped to the layout, just to help operators out with where the signals are, but also when they're in a town to get some orientation of where the factories or industries are that they might be pulling cars from. So that green signal there is milepost 302, kind of the yard limit sign. and the track sweep into what will be the depot in this area here. So that'll be something that'll have to scratch built. And then the main line and the passing siding sweep around the peninsula with the westbound signal basically from where it's at all around the peninsula to the other side protects the yard. So when a train rolls by that signal, essentially it can stay on the main line going parallel to the yard and then right into staging. But a lot of times we will have trains that will stop here. Their engines will come over here to the siding. They will pull cars or pick up cars and get back on. Well, we want that train that is sitting here to be protected by that signal on the other side of the layout. And so that's why that is very important, that if that stays red, it's because somebody is over here on this side working the yard, picking up cars or that. There are times where the track might be, switched and they might have a red signal and nothing is interfering on the main line, but something is on the passing siding or vice versa. So either way, it's good protection to have that whole area protected by the signal. Sometimes for the yard crews, it won't matter on that signal unless they ask permission to come out, because most of the time during operating sessions, I try to have the crews switch from this side of the yard so it's visible. There are a few times where we've switched at this end of the yard, but the problem is as you get down to that end of the yard, you can't see your train and you don't know what's coming out of the staging area. So I'd rather have the switching being taken place out here where it's visible. The other nice thing is if you're switching and there's nothing on the siding, you've got a nice long switching lead for pulling cars in and out for sorting and that doesn't interfere with the main. Sometimes when you do have to leave the siding, you can run out, go over what I call the home signal. You could trip it and then come back and start doing your switching, such as at the Grinnell Glove Factory, the ice plant, or the Swift Packing, or we have Medusa Cement right here. So my update is not quite complete yet. I do have another TS2 that is mounted basically underneath the layout right there. I have a set of sensors already in right here by the Swift poultry plant. I have my infamous straw sticking up out of the ground where a signal will go. But these signals over here I split up, and I did that for a couple reasons. One signal is going to be on this side of the layout that's visible. The other is going to be on the other side of this wall, my staging area. The reason I did that is if you were an operating crew and you're looking down here and you see that signal is green, that pretty much tells you that's open block. But if all of a sudden it's red, that definitely helps you know that, hey, I haven't heard from the dispatcher, I haven't heard from a train crew, but if the signal that's facing me is red, it means something is coming at me. That is not obviously the good time to say, hey, that's a great time for me to pull out on the west end of the switching lead. No. If that signal is red, do not pull out on there. There's another reason I kind of split them up too, is some of you may have noticed from a couple videos that, wait, is there a new switch added here that wasn't there before? Yes, there is. There's a new switch added just inside the opening to the staging. And I've always thought I've wanted to have a little area for an M&L yard. And so I put a switch in last spring during the pandemic when I was at home with cabin fever. I was just like itching to do something. And so I put in just a little 4-track M&L yard. Holds a couple engines, a caboose, and anywhere from about 20 to 24 cars. But just a neat thing where I could say, okay, we're going to run an M&L train, since the M&L also went through Grinnell, and it can leave there, come right into this yard, make some interchanges, and then obviously if I want to continue to run it east as a detour train, or if it's just a case that it picks up cars here and runs right back into its yard. So it has a couple options there. So my hope is once I get this last set of signals here, all the signaling will be done in the main train room. So that'll be 22 signal heads and 11 TS2s within this room. Now, there are some things I have kicked around for the staging area, and I'll share those with you now, but I'm still kind of kicking them around as to what that might look like. So just to follow up from leaving the staging area where the yard just was, I said one signal would be on that side of the wall. Here's where the other facing signal would be. And then obviously the switch that goes right into the M. St. L yard right here. Now, the neat thing about having a switch on this side too, it works just the same. If somebody is on my upper staging area and they're wanting to know, hey, can I go ahead and depart the yard and head east, and the signal over here, once the signal gets mounted, is red, obviously they know that that block that they want to go into is occupied, and so they need to just wait. And then once it's in the clear, then that train can certainly leave. The other thing for both the top and the bottom of this deck is when I first put them in, I just went with the pink foam and just put in, just gluing the cork to it. And the rest of my staging is pretty much Homosote. And so I had thought at time that I would really like to kind of pull up the pink foam and have something a little more solid, more like the Homosote in that. So far it seems to have worked well, and it wouldn't take much to pull the foam out. I already have the tin plate because I essentially have a sheet of wood underneath that I could cut the Homosote in and then just drop it in place. I would need to have a hole back here because that's where I have my power source, but that'd be real easy to put a hole in there, and that might be a summer project. So even when I get the signals in, this pink foam may or may be changed out. It's just been one of those things I've been thinking about. And the same is true on the lower level, is that this section that is up here, I have the same amount of area down below that also has a sheet of pink foam. So if I bought a 4x8 or even a 4x4 probably sheet of Homosote, or if I could even get a 2 foot by 4 foot, I could probably make it work in this area and just kind of angle it a little differently. So that's one of the things for the signaling at this end of staging. So moving right below it, on the lower deck, I have the main layout room. The track comes in and then goes into what is more a functional staging yard there. And during a regular operating session, we do have a crew member that tears apart, makes up trains, any of that. And I do have a switching lead in this yard. This track right here, whoops, excuse my arm. This track right here in the foreground is essentially the switching lead. And so the engines and about 9 cars can come out, and on the other side, the pencil sharpener and that can hit all the ladder tracks to push and pull cars from that. The only problem is sometimes you need a little more lead than the switching lead that I have. Well, I had thought at one time about extending this track here and swinging it out straight and then just running it right behind the door there and just have a nice straight. And that would probably gain me, I'm going to guess at least another 9 cars. So now we're talking about an 18 car train that we could kind of pull things from. But I forgot, behind that door, we have all of the measurements of our girls from when they grew up. And my guess is my wife wouldn't be too happy if I started covering those up with bench work. So instead of covering those up with bench work, I think I'm pretty much going to stick with what I have. So that gives me the need of, I need some intermediate signals here. So when I do have a train that is switching the yard and this switching lead is not enough for it, that it's going to have to come out on the track parallel to it, which is the main line. Well, I want the crew who's switching there to know if anything is coming at them from the train room. There is a set of signals beyond that hole, and that helps the crew that's leaving the train room know what's occupying or not occupying in the staging area, but it doesn't really help the staging area know what's coming at them. So I thought maybe a couple little dwarf signals here, and I say dwarf because I know how much we reach during switching a staging area, that dwarf would be smaller to the ground, less likely to get damaged and that I thought I would put a dwarf signal there. Not so much for the mainline crews. I mean, they can certainly look at the signals and read the indication, but more for the switching crews. So if they wanted to come out because they had a long train that they needed to kind of break up, that they know that that main line is pretty open to them. So similar to what I mentioned at the east end of the yard, I would like to do the same on the west end. I have a switch right here that goes from the main and then leads right up to all the yard tracks at the west end of the yard. And along with that, on my west end of the yard, I have basically locomotive storage. So anything that's not being used, where it is at. The one thing that I do see is that I have an additional switch here that is also a switching lead that goes essentially under one of my rungs of the Helix, and I'll try to do this without being too disruptive, and comes out over there on that lower level. And so that can hold about 15 cars, and so that makes a great switching lead for the west end of the staging yard. But the problem I see is that I don't think I can get by with dwarf signals, because if I have a train that is parked here, a crew isn't going to be able to see the signal. So the signals on the west end, I may not be able to use dwarf signals. Instead, I might just go with ones that are up obviously on the post, but I will probably set them back a little bit. Like I might have the signals this way. That way, when somebody's reaching to throw the switch, they're also not interrupting or hitting the signals. The other thing that I've contemplated is obviously you're not going to be able to see one of the faces of the switch, or excuse me, of the signals, because it's going to be facing the wrong way. So I've often thought that I may have to turn both signals facing this way, but indicate that, hey, the one signal is the flow of traffic for trains heading west, but the other traffic signal or the other signal is for east, even though it is still facing the same west direction. And so I'm not sure if I may paint the signal a little different, or hang a little sign on it, or just make a note for operators and just put a little tag up here to say how to read the signal so they don't get confused. And moving back to the upper deck again, for the upper staging, kind of the same thing of right here at kind of the throat of having some signals that would indicate that a train can depart and head west. But I also need to have a signal here that says anything that is coming up the Helix and then swinging around this section of track and then coming into staging. So I will also need two dwarf signals there, because when a train leaves the staging, it essentially goes down the 6.5 rings of the Helix and then comes out in the train layout room, and that'll be its next signal. So that's a very long block to go with the train occupying it and not knowing where it's at. I just don't see the necessity right now of splitting up the Helix into a bunch of blocks for signals. I would rather just say, hey, when you're leaving this, until you hit the next signal, understand that you are in the Helix block. Going back to the little train diagrams I made, what I did just for kind of fun is when I printed off another set, I put one together to give the whole schematic of the layout. So somebody who is here staging or making up trains in the lower staging yard, if they're not sure what direction a town is at, here they have a whole diagram of the railroad going from west and following it along to the east. And so it's kind of fun to look at. I wish there was some way I could duplicate this in kind of a roundabout way for my dispatcher's board, and I'm still kicking around the idea of that. And here we end at upper staging again. Well, I hope you enjoyed kind of my update with the signals. I do have to say I have enjoyed a lot of the questions and people who have been talking about, hey, I'm getting into signaling, and have directed it to me. And if I can't answer them, I always feel it's great to kind of give them the source, whether it's talking to Azatrax that makes the TS2s that I'm working with, or if it is Custom Signal Systems that's building the signals for me. So I'm always glad to share that information with you to kind of help you get started on your railroading endeavors. So take care for now. Stay tuned, as I hope to have more content added this year. And so take care for now. Thanks for watching.